All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're going to unpack a massive constitutional story, one that's been 75 years in the making. I'm talking, of course, about Article 370, that one-of-a-kind provision that for decades gave Jammu and Kashmir a very unique, very special status within India.
So think about this for a second. How do you actually erase a part of a country's constitution that's been on the books for over 70 years? I mean, is that even possible? Well, that is the central puzzle we're going to piece together today. And trust me, the answer takes us on a fascinating ride through law, politics, and a whole lot of history.
You know, to really get our heads around this, we're actually going to start at the end of the story, kind of like starting a movie with the final scene, right? So let's fast forward to December 11, 2023. This was the day India's Supreme Court delivered its final, definitive, no-turning-back verdicts on the whole thing.
And wow, what a decisive ruling it was. The court was unanimous. Every single judge agreed. They upheld the 2019 move to scrap the article. And the reasoning here is key. The judges said, look, Article 370 was always meant to be temporary. They also affirmed that Jammu and Kashmir didn't hold any separate, internal sovereignty after it joined India. They gave the green light to the reorganization of the state, and even told the Election Commission, hey, get elections going there by September 2024. So legally speaking, case closed. But to really understand why this was such a monumental decision, we've got to rewind all the way back to the beginning.
Okay, so let's get into it. How on earth did this article, which was totally unique, nothing else like it in the entire Indian Constitution, even come to exist in the first place?
Well, the story really kicks off right here with this document, the Instrument of Accession. It's October 1947, the partition of India is underway, and it's absolute chaos. In the middle of all this, the ruler, Maharaja Hari Singh, signs on the dotted line, officially joining his kingdom with the newly independent India. But, and this is a huge but, it came with some major strings attached. The deal was that India's parliament could only make laws for the state on three specific things: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. That's it. This single document planted the seed for everything that followed. And that seed grew into what we now know as Article 370. Now, here's a super important detail. It wasn't just stuffed anywhere in the Constitution. It was placed in a section literally called Temporary, Transitional, and Special Provisions. I mean, the word temporary was right there in the heading. So the article limited Parliament's power, but most importantly, it built in its own off-ramp. It explicitly stated it could only be removed on the recommendation of the Jammu and Kashmir Constituent Assembly, the very body that was about to be formed to write the state's own constitution.
But of course, things are never quite that simple, are they? What actually followed were decades of really complex legal and political evolution, and the whole debate started to boil down to one single question. Just how temporary was this temporary provision really?
And this is where things get really tricky. It's like a constitutional riddle. Check this out. In 1957, the J&K Constituent Assembly finishes its job, drafts the state constitution, and then it just dissolves. But, and you can't miss this, it did so without making any recommendation to get rid of Article 370. So what happens now? It left this giant legal question mark. Over the years, various Supreme Court rulings seem to suggest that because the one body that was supposed to repeal it was gone, the article had, by default, become permanent. It created this kind of frozen-in-time status.
And this quote here from Sheikh Abdullah, a key political figure at the time, it really gets to the heart of the feeling back then. He said, "The ultimate source of sovereignty resides in the people." It's this powerful idea that the state should have a deep sense of its own autonomy. And that sentiment, that idea, it really became the bedrock of Jammu and Kashmir's unique legal and political identity for decades to come.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Now we're at the big moment, the climax of this whole 75-year story. We're in 2019, and a series of swift, interconnected moves are about to be made that will completely change everything we've just talked about.
So how did they set the stage for this? Well, the groundwork was laid back in 2018. The local coalition government in the state collapsed. That led first to something called governor's rule, and then, the really critical move, president's rule. Now, what that means is that all the powers of the state's own legislative assembly were effectively handed over to the Indian parliament in Delhi. And this transfer of power was the absolute key to what was about to happen next.
So here we are, back at that constitutional lock. Remember, the rulebook, Article 370 itself, said you needed a recommendation from the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. But that assembly hadn't existed since 1957. It's the ultimate catch-22. How do you get permission from a group that's been gone for over 60 years?
This was the master key. This is how that lock was picked. A presidential order was issued. And it was clever. It didn't try to attack Article 370 head-on. No, it did something much more surgical. It went after how a key phrase was interpreted. With the stroke of a pen, the words constituent assembly were now legally defined to mean the legislative assembly of the state, a complete reinterpretation.
So you can see the whole sequence here. It was like dominoes falling perfectly into place. First, remember, Parliament is already in charge because of President's rule, so it's acting as the J&K Legislative Assembly. Then comes that first presidential order which redefines the key phrase. So now Parliament, wearing its J&K Assembly hat, passes a resolution saying, yep, we recommend getting rid of Article 370. And once they had that recommendation, boom, a final presidential order is issued, and just like that, Article 370 becomes inoperative. The whole thing undone in about 48 hours. Just incredible.
But wait, the story doesn't end there. Removing the article wasn't the final move. It was immediately followed by a fundamental reorganization of the entire region itself. What used to be the single state of Jammu and Kashmir was literally split in two. A new law, the Reorganization Act of 2019, created two new union territories, which are administered more directly by the central government. You now have the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, which gets to keep a local assembly, and the Union Territory of Ladakh, which does not.
So what does this new reality actually look like on the ground? Well, for one, the entire Indian constitution now applies there, no exceptions. The old, separate state constitution of Jammu and Kashmir is effectively gone. And this is a big one. Laws around who can own land and get government jobs have been changed, opening them up to people from outside the region for the first time. And while the Supreme Court did sign off on all this, it also made a point to note the central government's promise to, at some point down the road,